Thank you very much for coming, despite we are out of our usual academic teaching period. So today we have the pleasure of introducing Jordi Paniagua. Jordi Paniagua is full professor of economics from the University of Valencia and also distinguished research affiliate at the Kellogg Institute for International Studies. And mainly his research is about international economics. However, today you will introduce a new topic, which is the complex economic complexity. So I think that it can be interesting, particularly because also the embryonic idea perhaps comes from a joint venture between Agustí, Rafa, Miro, and yourself. So I think that also can be interesting. And thank you very much to the students. We have several students, and they are not PhD students, so I think it perhaps can be also interesting for you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Merche, for the invitation and the kindness of having me here. Thank you, Agustí, for pointing into the direction, giving the ideas, and opening this complexity. So, what I'm going to speak today is, on the first hand, a theoretical model to understand how we can introduce measures of economic complexity in international trade. Then we are going to take this model into empirics. We are going to use the gravity equation of international trade, and then lastly, we are going to see, or I'm going to try to make sense of the results that we're getting and try to understand why this could be important and how can we assess different, let's say, timely policies to understand the effects of complexity in international trade and general equilibrium. Okay? So that's the plan for today. So the first question that we need to ask is if the world is more complex than it used to be. No? So the first question is like it's not new. The world has become more complex, and there are several asseverations. For example, there was a Harvard Business Review article that says the end of competitive advantage. No? So competitive advantage has died, and the reasons why countries trade do not follow competitive advantages reasons, but follow other diagnoses. What we will see in this list in the model is that relative comparative advantage is much at the heart of any complexity measure that we want to construct and that will reinforce into trade. No? And this is a cartoon saying that when something invents something new, no? So there's increases the complexity. No? This is, for example, this prehistorical Stone Age character says, I just invented writing, and then thanks a lot you made everybody else in the world illiterate. No? So complexity in this sense is always a relative measure. No? So why? Because if, for example, and there's a huge debate right now regarding the effects of the high increase in productivity related, for example, to AI, but that increase in productivity is based on a certain sector, basically in the US. How does that increase in productivity, that increase in complexity in the United States, transfer to the rest of the world? So that's a really open question today. So the question whether the world has become more complex, we can see, and I will become more clear on the what does the complexity index really measure. What we see here from 1995 to 2015, actually the trend is an upward trend. So the data is telling us that the world has increasingly become more complex than it used to be. And probably if we were to expand this the next decade, we will see an increase in complexity like, and I will explain what this complexity means in a moment. Where is the world more complex? You can see here, so this is the rank of complexity from 1 to 128. Red colors are countries that are more complex, so basically it's the usual suspects that we might think of, no? For example, United States, but also here Mexico, continental Europe, Japan, and China. So we cannot say that complexity, or at least the rank of complexity, is allocated in a single country. So there has been also a rise in complexity between what I will call the West and the rest. And this is what we can see here, a reversal of complexities. We can see that the world overall has become more complex, but there has been, let's say, increase in the complexity of developing countries. And here we have 6 countries. You can see there is an upward trend on the right-hand side. And the complexity in the West either has become constant or has declined. So there's seems to be like a shifting in complexity that might be also related to offshoring. And we will see how we can juggle between complexity, offshoring, and trade of intermediates and final products. Okay? So basically, when we see that the world has become more complex, the usual suspects for this increasing complexity are countries like China, Thailand, Poland, Korea, so new players in the international area. Okay, so after the motivation, I will give you some background on how to measure complexity, then I will lay out the basics of the model, I will bring the model into data, and then we will do some GE counterfactuals. We will see, for example, what would be the global output, measures of welfare, if we had a complexity of 1995. So if we went to a less complex world, okay? But what would happen, for example, if we made America great again? So these are the kind of policy counterfactuals that the model would allow us to do. So for example, what would happen if we just turn America into the more complex country in the world? Okay? So this is America is great again, and we can see what would happen exactly in that place, or what would happen if we bring back jobs from China. Okay? If we believe that the complexity measures affect trade, we can play around with those complexity measures and imagine a world different from our world in counterfaction. Okay, so my aim today is to bring you some ideas about complexity, present some results and estimates, and to do that I will develop a model that delivers us predictions of what is the effect of complexity in trade, and then in how that fits into general GDP. And then I will use structural gravity to deliver partial equilibrium results, and I will obtain, let's say, trade-induced welfare effects from those partial equilibrium results. Okay? So please stop me at any time if you have any questions, comments, and this is very much also work under progress, although it's like 8 years, so like I work very slow, especially when I try to work alone, but this is sometimes how research is done, no? Like if you are in a hurry, sometimes you don't get the best results. So how are we going to measure complexity? Complexity starts with 2 measures. Measure number 1 is the diversification of countries' exports. Okay, so this measures the MCP, it's just a matrix. It's a country product matrix, and the diversity of a given country is how many country partners does this particular country have. Okay, and this is a very simple matrix. This is a 0-1 matrix. And it just measures with which countries and products does my particular country product pair have a comparative advantage. So for example, if Spain has a comparative advantage in cars and it exports cars to France, it will have a 1 in the exports of Spanish cars to France. And if Spain exports cars not only to France, but it's also to Italy and Germany, it will have the diversity of Spain in cars will be 3. Okay? So this is the first measure of complexities.
Just one clarification. I'm a bit confused because I thought that you were gonna study the effect of complexity in trade.
Yes.
But this is already trade.
Yes.
Right? So
yeah, we will see. We will get there. My claim is that I'm going to study first on aggregate trade. This is at the product country level, and I'm going to aggregate that up. And then I'm going to use IVs to identify that in the operation. Okay? So even if you don't believe that there is like an exogeneity measure there, I'm going to use an instrumental variable to study the partial effect. Okay?
And when you mean trade, you refer to trade of final goods or also inputs?
Aggregate trade between country pairs. So it might include final and intermediates. Okay, so I'm going to, let's say, aggregate up and get, let's say, the final value of trade. So, and remember, there is nothing about value here, because this is just a 0, 1. And then I'm going to get the complexity measure at the country level and take that complexity measure at the bilateral value level. Okay?
And you measure it at the product level?
Yes. Yeah. Let me give you an example. Okay, because maybe with an example it becomes clear, no? So diversity. So, for example, Netherlands exports to Argentina and Ghana, and Netherlands exports to 3 different countries, no? So then the diversity to 5 different countries. So the diversity of Netherlands is 5, because it has relative comparative advantage with 5 countries' product pairs. Okay, so that's a first measure of complexity, is with how many countries do I have a relative comparative advantage in which products. Okay, so that's the first measure of complexity. The second measure of complexity is what we call ubiquity. So diversity is at the country pair, country product level, and ubiquity is at the product country level. So ubiquity is the number of countries in which a product is connected. Okay? So for example, fish or fresh fish is connected to 3 countries. So 3 countries are exporting this kind of product. Okay? So those 2 measures of complexity, how many countries have relative comparative advantage, and then at the product level, how many countries are exporting the product is a measure of complexity. So complexity will combine those 2 measures recursively. So the question, the central question of what's the complexity index of a country is whether those products are exported by few countries, but you can say, okay, for example, I can only export oil from countries that have oil. No? So we need to control for natural resources which are very rare, because you can say, okay, imagine that microchips. No? Microchips is a highly complex product, so only a handful of countries develop the technological stance to be able to export those products. But this can be confusing if we take, let's say, a simple average of diversity and ubiquity, because we can think about diamonds. There's only a handful of countries that can export diamonds, and those are countries that happen to have that natural resource. But diamonds are not really a complex product. So what we do, or what this measure does, is see whether those products are exported by diversified countries. So for example, we can think about Congo. Congo exports diamonds, but it's basically their only export. So we will not assess as Congo as a highly complex country. On the other hand, for example, Taiwan exports microchips, but but it also exports many other things. So although, let's say, the exports from diamonds and microchips come maybe for a handful of countries, the countries that export microchips export also many other things. So that will be our measure of complexity. Is when you export products that are only exported by a handful of countries, so that's the diversity measure, but those other countries are highly diversified in exports. Okay? So how is, and at the end of the day, we will have standardized measure. Okay, so the measure of the ECI that we're going to use, the economic complexity index, will be standardized by 0. If you have a positive measure, it will be higher than average, and if you have a lower measure, it will be lower than average. So basically, the ACI score is done by capturing in this matrix the eigenvector and the eigenvalue of your complexity. So basically, the main feature of complexity is that our complexity in this product country matrix will be captured by a vector that really doesn't shift after many different possibilities, and that's the complexity measure. Okay, so the measure of how many products I'm exporting to diversified countries will be captured by the measure that will be, let's say, unique for each country. That will be their eigenvector and eigenvalue. And at the end of the day, to produce from that vector a single measure, this is just a standardized score, and as we saw in the previous slide, if we have a value higher than 0, it will be a high complexity above average. If we have a value less than 0, it will be complexity below average. Okay? And this is done, and then the authors of the complexity measures show that the eigenvector is exactly the same as doing recursively, asking whether the products that we're exporting are exported by diversified countries or not. Okay? And this is key to get to your question. So this is a question that should worry us, whether there's going to be, let's say, a mechanical link, whether we are capturing, if we introduce this ECI measure in any trade empirical formulation, if we are going to capture, let's say, just a mechanical effect or, let's say, economic behavioral effect. So, I'm reluctant to use the word proof, but we could argue that the ECI measure that's computed earlier from, let's say, the eigenvector of the product country matrix is independent of the bilateral trade volumes by construction. Okay? So that avoids any kind of mechanical interpretation of the results that we're getting. Nonetheless, we should always be worried, maybe not about mechanics, but maybe about endogeneity, and that's what we are going to use in this case FDI as an instrumental variable for the empirics. Okay? So basically, in a nutshell, bilateral trade volumes between countries, and we are not capturing the direction, so the direction will be captured by relative comparative advantage, and that will make us weary, but the direction here is given. What we are going to estimate is just the volumes. The volumes of trade are not determined by relative comparative advantage. The volumes of trade are going to be dependent on distance, size, border, language, and I will come to this later when I explain the empirics, but basically the scaffolds of the gravity equation. Okay? I don't know if that answers your point, but this is the extent. So when we, this comes directly from the authors, from Ricardo and Hausmann. So when we use those index of economic complexity, we can see that those are positively correlated, for example, with income per capita, and less so, but also positively correlated with the growth of per capita GDP. Okay, so there seems to be, let's say, a relationship between those kind of indices and welfare, even if measured in a crude manner. Okay, is the upward trend that we saw in the earlier slide is a bit like misleading, because the West, and here we have an average of the complexity index of the OECD countries. OECD countries are much more complex than the rest of the world, as we saw in the map. Okay, so central question to our model is whether complexity shifting, meaning having an increase in complexity in non-OECD countries can lead to offshoring. Okay, so basically the theoretical mechanism to which we can link complexity and trade is via offshoring. Okay, I can only start producing iPhones in China if China becomes more complex in economic terms. Okay, measured as what we said, but we will need some research and development capabilities. We will need building human capital. We will need, so I mean, it's very hard to have, as we were using in the previous example, to have an offshoring center of manufacturing capabilities in, I don't know, like Congo or Ghana, as we said. No? We need to have them in countries that are more capable in economic complexity. Okay, and here, like, depends on the theoretical stance that you take. At least and in Samuelson in 2004, the answer to this question, which is not new, was that the offshoring of products will take some technological spillovers in their backpacks. So there is this relationship, or at least as argued by these authors, there is this relationship, this positive relationship between offshoring and complexity shifting. Meaning that we will try to explain that shift in complexity that we saw in the first slide via offshoring. So that would mean that China has become more complex, and the US has become relatively less complex because of all the offshoring from the USA to China. Okay, related literature. There's a very, let's say, not similar, but a very adjacent paper of Jordi and co-authors in 2018, which asked very similar questions, and that will give us, let's say, that lets us in the use of instrumental variables on FDI. So basically, the question that Beata Jordi was posing is whether FDI boosts complexity in host countries. Okay, so by bringing new factories, by bringing new investment in different countries, whether that increases complexity in those countries, and they use the same measure of economic complexity, and the answer was that it actually does. So that's why we are going to use in our empirical work FDI as an instrument of economic complexity, because there is this established relationship between complexity and FDI, and we will pose the case that the measure of FDI that we're going to use, which is Greenfield FDI, is relatively independent on trade, so then the exclusion restriction will apply to really investigate this relationship seriously in empirical terms. Okay, so let's move to the model. So the model is based on like three related papers. No, Acemoglu and co-authors in 2015, Rodriguez Clary in 2010, and it also stems from Krugman 1979. So the earlier work of program. So basically, we are going to simplify a Themogloss model and extend it to trade. Because in a Themogloss model, there was like no trade per se explicitly in the model. So we are going to build a very simple two countries, one final good, many intermediate kind of a model world, which simplifies Themogloss very much a Themogloss. But we are going to introduce spillovers, and we are going to introduce trade in that one. Basically, we are going to capture the stylized facts that I was presenting 2 or 3 slides ago. So we are going to have, let's say, 2 sharp theoretical predictions. Prediction number 1 is that complexity shifting will increase welfare. So if I bring complexity, if I move complexity from the west to the rest, that's going to increase welfare. And on the other hand, if the west keeps developing ideas, so it just increases that level of complexity, that's going to be also welfare enhancing. Okay? And then we are going to see that this also affects trade, and then we are going to have estimates related to this. Okay? So whenever we see the star, that's going to be a foreign country. Okay? We are going to take the stance like as usual in, let's say, international trade textbooks. So we are going to have the west, which is our own country, the rest, which is a foreign country, that will be denoted by stars. Okay? The 2 countries will differ in technological stance, and new technologies will be developed in our country and then will be transferred to the rest after paying an offshoring cost. Okay? There is nothing really particular about households and utilities. So this is, let's say, a pretty standard assumptions to have, let's say, a well-behaved model. Okay. The final good is the numerator, and we will have in the production of the final good will be based on intermediates, which are produced by one only factor of production, which is labor. Okay? So here alpha is actually the markup, because those intermediates will be produced in monopolistic competition, and sigma will denote the elasticity of substitution between those different intermediates. And A is just like the technology stance, which will grow endogenously. So this is, let's say, a balanced growth path type of model. Okay? So this is also pretty standard. Okay? The product maximization problem of the firm, okay, which is the revenues minus the cost, will deliver us the price of the intermediates. And here comes the first assumption, or the first, let's say, tweak in the model. We will have that those intermediates are produced differently in the rest, which is the X star, and in the west. Okay. When I produce those intermediates, for example, in the United States, I'm going to have a positive externality. Okay. And that positive externality, what we're going to say is that positive externality is endogenous to the level of economic complexity in our countries. No? So, for example, let's think about AI. If I'm producing some kind of intermediate and I have a highly complex country, by, for example, using AI, that's going to have my final output will not just be the number of workers that I have in that country, but it will be amplified by those externalities that at the end of the day depend on your economic complexity. Okay? So economic complexity is going to amplify the number of outputs that you can produce per worker. And that happens only in the West, because in the West is under the assumptions of this model, and the West is where ideas are being produced and then offshored to the West. You can see here that's going to give us, let's say, one of the first predictions of the model. If we increase the complexity in the West, the level of complexity in the West, that's going to raise the number of productivity, basically the number of outputs that they can produce per worker, and that's going to increase at the end total output and consumption and welfare.
Jordi,
Yes.
then the economic complexity will be equivalent to the technological level of a country.
I mean, you can understand it. You can understand it that way, although the technological stance of a country will be A, as in many other models, it will be total factor productivity. Here, the economic complexity, what it raises is the spillovers of producing intermediates. No? When we produce intermediates only with labor, if I have a highly complex environment, I will be able to produce those intermediates with less labor, basically. Okay? So imagine that I'm producing, I don't know, textbooks, which are intermediates for any other kind of production. If I have AI, I can produce more textbooks with less workers. Okay? But this is, I mean, it's close to that, but it's not total factor productivity. Okay? It's related to these spillovers on intermediate production on labor. So basically, I will need less labor to produce the same output, or with the same amount of labor, I can produce more intermediates. Okay? So this is the first effect of complexity, affects that positive externality, which is concentrated on the West, which is the one which is generating new ideas. Oops. So what happens on the West? No, we can, and this relates to the actually the John Markert paper of Paul Krugman in 1979. We assume that the West could potentially produce our products, but this is not in their own advantage, and the rest can produce only a subset of intermediates, no? Which will be here denoted by kappa. And now we are going to use, let's say, how many intermediates can the rest produce. That will be directly related with their economic complexity. Okay? So here economic complexity plays two different roles. On the West, economic complexity increases this productivity of labor. In the rest, economic complexity allows firms to produce more final products, basically. Okay? So in the West, I can generate ideas, and those ideas will increase the number of intermediates. In the rest, economic complexity, what will allow me is to take part of those ideas and produce it, manufacturing in the factories in the products. Okay, so here economic complexity plays two different roles in production. So here, when a larger kappa will mean that there's going to be more production in the rest, more offshoring, and that's going to be related by the economic complexity in these countries. Okay? So basically, complexity in the rest will be, let's say, the normal relative comparative advantage. Complexity in the West will also have that kappa, but it will also have the production spillover, which is here. Okay. So there are, let's say, three parts moving: the number of products that you can assure, and the spillover. So let's think about the theoretical results that we can obtain. So at the end of the day, the world's total production will be just an aggregate, Cobb-Douglas aggregate, a CS aggregate of the goods produced in the rest and the goods produced in the West. So what happens if we increase the number of offshore products? If we increase the number of offshore products, so this is just given by the derivative of the total world production relative to kappa, this will be positive, meaning that we will increase the world total production if the number of products offshore to the rest is below this threshold. And that particular threshold is to ensure that local wages are higher than foreign wages. Okay? So basically there's optimal number of offshore products that will increase total production, and that's until the point where wages in the West are larger than wages in the rest. Okay, so that's the first aspect that we were expecting. What happens if I increase complexity in China, in Taiwan, in Pakistan? We will increase total world production as long as the wages are lower than in the USA or in Europe. Okay? So increasing complexity in the rest up to a certain threshold will be welfare enhancing. What happens if we increase complexity in the West, or we increase the level of complexity in the West? So this is just taking the derivative of the world production relative to the spillover. That will always be positive. Okay? So you can think like if we suddenly offshore all our products to the rest, that will surpass the threshold. That will not be welfare enhancing. But if we increase the spillover, if we increase the complexity in the West, that will always be welfare enhancing. Okay. And what happens to the limit? No, because to the threshold, could we obtain some comparative statics on where we put the threshold of the spillovers? So we can easily show that this threshold decreases with the level of spillovers in the West and the elasticity of substitution. And this is just basically by taking the limits of the threshold. The threshold was here, remember? This was this. Basically, it's just like the ratio of total workers in the rest to the worst population. This ratio will decrease if we have, let's say, an infinite spillover. If we have AI that can do everything, if we have robots, there is no sense in offshoring. Okay? So the threshold will be 0. I will not offshore anything. If I have AI that can solve all my problems in the West, then I will not offshore to any other country. And then if the elasticity of substitution is 1, meaning that those products are not substitutable, then I will not offshore anything. No, because I will not be able to substitute one intermediate input with another. Okay. So I mean, this is something that I'm trying. I mean, as I was saying, it was very much work in progress. I'm trying to shift this paper to maybe like think or like make us think about AI and how AI relates to trade. So if we have, let's say, a world where data is infinite, where AI, let's say, surpasses human intelligence, and suddenly I can take care of everything with AI enhanced robots, that for sure will increase world's total output. but it will reduce this offshoring and complexity shifting. So maybe we have, let's say, a more unequal and polarized world. No? Because here in this type of model, the West will have an increase in their welfare via offshoring. No? So this is like this shared economic production. So we can reach a situation, or at least this model will tell us that we can reach a situation where the whole production is made in the West and there is no production in the rest, but however there is an increase in world total production. So whether this reflects, let's say, a feasible output from the point of view of a political economy, I'm not that sure. But at least this is what this model will suggest. Okay, so let's turn to trade, because at the end of the day, it is the trade predictions that at least I'm interested in, because these are very testable predictions. And as we would expect, the effect of shifting complexity, that means increasing kappa, which is the number of products that are produced in the rest, will increase trade flows only if we are below the threshold, and the effect of increasing complexity in the West will increase also trade flows. No, I mean, it's just like mimicking. It's very easy to translate the previous equations into trade equations, because at the end of the day, trade will be monotonically increasing with production. Okay, so these are the theoretical predictions that we have, and now let's take any questions until the moment. Is everything more or less clear? Okay. So now let's take this to the gravity question. Okay, so structural gravity is the gold standard of international trade empirics, and this is the same equations that we had before. So Xij is trade flows, is the value of trade flows between country I, which is the exporter, country J, which is the importer. That will depend on trade frictions. Trade frictions can be distance, can be common language, can be any impediments to bring in products from the exporter to the importer, and this will be trade flows will increase in the economic masses of country I and country J, but also modulated with multilateral resistance terms or third country effects. So basically what we're saying is that, like, if we want to measure trade flows, value of trade flows between two countries, we will need to control for third country effects, because the different trade options will matter for determining the size of the pie of trade flows. Meaning, for example, if Spain and France trade within a certain volume, that will be very different if trade Spain and France were located on the moon. Why? Because they will only be able to trade with each other. There are no third country options, but since I can trade with France, or I can trade with Italy, or I can trade with Morocco, in a way those other options in the menu will impact my bilateral trade. This, let's say, theoretical result will have a direct impact on the empirics that we're going to use, and also a direct impact when we translate the theoretical model to the data. Why? Because we are going to capture, and this is just like our recommendations to estimate the gravity model. We are going to capture those third country effects with fixed effects on the importer and the exporter. Meaning that, for example, if I want to introduce any variable which is country specific and time varying, like for example the economic complexity index, this variable will be totally absorbed by the fixed effects. Okay, that stem from, let's say, the gravity theory. So what have other researchers, or what was done in the past? For example, we can compute, for example, any combination between the economic complexity of the importer, the economic complexity in the exporter. Now we can use the sum, the average, and what we will try to do is try to come up with equivalent measure of the complexity index, which is not captured by the fixed effect. So basically, what we will try to do is create, let's say, I will not call it fake, but let's say an alternative measure that at the end of the day we are not really sure what it's capturing, but it has IJT variance. Okay, is that clear? Okay. So another way would be, for example, to omit totally the multilateral resistance terms. But here, if I omit the multilateral resistance terms, I'm taking Spain and France to the moon. I cannot really estimate, I cannot really give an estimate of the complexity indices and how they relate to bilateral trade, because I'm not taking into account what the theoretical model of structural gravity predicted, that is that we need to at least control for importer and exporter fixed effects. The trick is to construct a variable which will not be absorbed by fixed effects. And that trick is related to actually another theoretical prediction of the gravity equation, that is, if we take the market clearance conditions seriously, everything which is not exported must be consumed locally. So that means that when I include, or when I estimate trade flows between I and J countries, the theory will tell me that I will need also to introduce domestic trade flows. Those are the products that, instead of being exported, are consumed locally. So oranges that are being grown in Tarragona and they are eaten in Madrid, for example. And that allows me to create a variable, which is the this variable here, which is a border variable, which will take a value of 0 if the product is domestic, and a value of 1 if the product is internationally traded. And the economic trick to identify country fixed variables which are time varying, which are totally collinear with fixed effects, is interacting those variables with this border. Okay, so this comes. Oops, sorry. I thought I had a problem here. So this comes from recent. Not really that recent, like 5 years ago. What these papers highlighted is that by using this dummy and interacting that with our variable of interest, the interaction is not collinear. And furthermore, the interaction will have a higher degree of exogeneity if we believe that the decision to export locally or import internationally is independent of the trade volumes. No? So, for example, if border is exogenous, even if ECI was partially endogenous, the interaction should at least carry some of the exogeneity in the no? So this is a 2016 result of the Journal of Econometrics. Okay. So this is the trick that we are going to use. Okay. So for example, here, Here we are not using domestic data. So this is just some kind of estimates that we would have in this naive approach, where I can say, okay, I either need to drop the importer and exporter fixed effects, like columns 3, 4, and 5. They report positive effects of the ECI index on international trade, but here I don't have any kind of fixed effects. I mean, they are not collinear, but I cannot really believe those actually, let's say, high estimates of ECI in at the importer and the exporter, because I'm not controlling for the third country effects. What have we done in the past? So, for example, I can construct a measure which is just the geometrical average, but here I don't know exactly what I'm capturing. No, because I'm saying, okay, this is the average between exporter and importer. Okay, this average will not be collinear, so I can estimate it. Or I can just have the difference between importer and importer, and here we will also get a high number, a high estimate. Okay? So what do? We include domestic trade here, we include all the fixed effects, and now I can really estimate the effect of economic complexity at the importer along with my fixed effects. Okay? Here you can see here column 1. I don't have a country per fixed effect, so this is capturing the heterogeneity at the country per level, which does not vary over time. So for example, things like distance, like continuity, common language, I can introduce them here. Once I control for the per fixed effects in columns 3, 4, and 5, so all these variables are captured by the fixed effects. Even the border variable is captured by the fixed effects. And here I can get, let's say, even more precise estimates of the effect of increasing the economic complexity, in this case at the importer, on the volume of trade. So we get really consistent and positive and significant effects here. Okay, so what we are taking here is one of the first predictions that we had from the model, that is increasing economic complexity will have a direct effect on increasing the volume of trade. Okay, so actually what we are seeing is this is the average marginal effect of the border variable. We can see here, for example, the border variable has been reduced in negative terms over time. What we are seeing here is, for example, if we get the effect of the border variable, which is, remember, this difference between domestic and international trade flows. If we take into account complexity, what we are saying is that complex countries actually tend to export more relative to their domestic trade. But what we are seeing here, or another way to interpret the results, the empirical results, is that increasing economic complexity reduces the barriers to international trade relative to domestic ones. So those countries which have more economic complexity tend to export less locally and more internationally. So for example, if Tarragona is exporting oranges, probably those oranges will end up in Madrid, will end up in Cádiz. But if Tarragona was exporting, instead of oranges, chips, the odds are that those chips will be exported less domestically and more internationally. Okay, so this is exactly what the interpretation of the result. So there's there's a shift in the economic complexity. Does not also a shift between the West and the rest, but economic complexity, it shifts from, let's say, local exports to international exports. Okay. And here I just took 3 arbitrary levels of complexity, and we can see here that if I have a very low economic complexity, I actually have a negative effect of border, so that means I export more locally than internationally. if I have, let's say, a level of complexity close to the world's average, I'm more or less so. No? Like I export the same amount locally than internationally. That will be, let's say, the effect of the zero, the zero average effect. And if I have a high economic complexity, I tend to export more internationally than domestically. And I think this more or less makes sense, no? Like if we think about like a very simple products, everybody will import those products, even domestic consumers. If I'm producing very complex products, the odds are that demand for those products will only be domestic is very low. No? High kind of complex products will be demanded by many consumers across the world. So if I'm producing iPhones are not just consumed locally, they are consumed everywhere. No? This is what the econometric results are telling us. And this is just the interaction between, let's say, the economic complexity square. And we can see here that this is just like has complexity gone too far. But we don't really see, let's say, a tipping point in economic complexity. Okay? This comes from this here. No, so this is not really significant. No, the economic complexity squared is not significant, so we don't see. I mean, it's negative but not significant. So, but we don't see any kind of like a tipping point in the effect of economic complexity. Okay. And so specifically related to your question and based on Beata Jawortek's paper from 2018, you can see, okay, I mean, one of the main arguments against the paper could be, okay, I mean, maybe there is no mechanical effect, but maybe there is like still some endogeneity or reverse causality. So what we take is capital announcements as an instrument. Capital announcements are taken from FDI markets, and this is when firms announce that they will invest in another country. Okay? And remember that paper in the Economic Journal told us that there was a positive relationship between FDI in a foreign country and economic complexity. So that means that FDI increases economic complexity at the host country where this is What we claim is that announcement of an FDI, okay, will increase economic complexity in the at the country, but that will not necessarily increase instantaneously international trade. Why? Because maybe these things take time into effect. There is an announcement. That announcement might be fulfilled or not. This is just an announcement in that country. But that announcement can, let's say, for example, stimulate students to study, to work in a factory. So imagine that, I don't know, chips factory announces that it's going to install a factory in... so let me take an example from close to home. Volkswagen announced that it was going to produce one of the largest battery factories in Valencia. Okay? So that stimulated a lot of interest from like engineers that are looking for flats and also like studies in engineering in Valencia, but at the end of the day that announcement is not still fulfilled. Nonetheless, it increased certain complexity, it increased certain local abilities that are, let's say, independent that factory is in place or not. So we are not exporting batteries, but just the announcement gave an increase to the complexity in Valencia. Okay? So this is a kind of like exclusion restriction that we are looking for, that if the announcement of the FDI increases the complexity, but it doesn't necessarily increase our trade. Okay? And actually, let's say complexity and FDI are positively related in the first stage. And in the second stage, we see that there is a huge effect of this instrumented complexity with international trade. Okay? So, how much time do I have? just to know if I need to rush or. Okay, I will.
5 minutes.
Okay, I will just go. I will skip. You just have to trust me that this comes from like a GE kind of model. Actually, this is solving Armington type of trade model. And then what we are doing is reversal of fortunes. Okay, so we are taking we are keeping constant everything else, but we are rolling back complexity to the complexity that we had in 1995. Okay, so we are making the world less complex. So what would that cost us? That will cost us around 2% of our GDP. And who is paying for that price? Basically, non-OECD countries. So basically, the OECD, let's say the advanced economies, will pay, let's say, a very small price, and the losers from, let's say, rolling back complexity would be, let's say, developing countries. And this is the offshoring. This is the offshoring channel. I mean, this is another way to assess that the increase in complexity between 1995 and 2008 increased world GDP output by 2%, and that those are only trade-induced welfare effects. Okay? And basically, this is just and the effect is on wages, on producer prices. So basically, wages would be reduced by, for example, in non-OECD countries by 8%, because they are producing less complex products, so lower wages and lower output. Okay. Here, this is another counterfactual that we can run, and we are keeping here complexity. This is so this first counterfactual is to the kappa. The second counterfactual is shocking the eta. Okay, so we are keeping complexity in the rest constant, and we are rolling back complexity to 1995. Okay, and actually that would increase world output by 1.24. And remember, complexity in the West has decreased over time. So this is like increasing complexity only in the West. So what would happen if we increase complexity in the West by maintaining constant complexity in the rest? We would increase our world's output by 1.2%. Okay? And this is basically related to higher wages. Okay? Well, I mean, actually, it's like a role between product prices that will increase by 2%, but wages will increase by 4%, and the result is 0.06 in OECD, and in non-OECD 0.64. Okay, so see, I mean, increasing complexity, and this is the three parts that we're moving. Increasing complexity in OECD countries has a positive effect for OECD countries, but most of the effect is also for non-OECD countries, because that will OECD countries have more products to offshore. Okay? So, and now we are taking only the USA. So, I mean, this is just a counterfactual. Let's say, let's make America great again. Let's increase only USA complexity from what it was in 1995, and basically the world's output increases by 0.2%, but the US's output increases by nearly 0.5%. And who are the countries that are winning is, for example, all the trade partners. No? So Canada, here, Mexico, so basically NAFTA partners. However, the effects are really are different, no? Because here we will see a decrease in nominal wages, which are compensated by higher, even lower product prices, no? So now real wage increases. And now the last counterfactual, no, is like this Trump's policy of bring back jobs, no, like start producing everything in the US instead of producing in China. So what we are doing here is we are reversing US and China's complexity. So we are imposing China's complexity, the US measure, and in the US, China's complexity. Okay? So we are just like shifting one country for the other. And we can see here that that will actually hurt both countries. So the world output will be reduced by 0.3%. And that's basically like non-OECD countries, and especially China, which is here, will drop their GDP, but also the US will be hurt. So I mean, this just like saying, okay, like let's bring everything back home. Let's not do offshoring. It's just reverse the complexity measures. That doesn't seem like a very wise policy. Okay. And now, just like let me conclude by summarizing the extent of this work. So, since we are close for lunch, I just prepared a menu to summarize the first thing. So, on the first plate, we had a theoretical model that tries to explain complexity in a kind of a trade model that extends well-established papers. On the second course, I used structural gravity to estimate the partial effects. And with those partial effects of complexity and trade, I can use that data to design different GE counterfactuals that tell us different, let's say, actual policies and their possible effects on trade and GDP. On the menu, I would like to extend this to the FDI that hasn't done before, but also migration. Because like here we don't allow people to move from one country to another. I think that will be, let's say, a natural extension of the model and the paper.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. So now it's time for questions. Thinking on the lunch. I don't know if somebody in the Teams. No? No questions? Just thinking on lunch?
Everyone just thinking on lunch and working.
Okay, so thank you very much for coming, and we hope that you finish this
Vosotros
this
ayudad,
work.
pues,
Ah,
en
sí.
castellano.
Pues venga.
No, parece castellano que en catalán. Do you understand Spanish? ¿Sí? ¿Ahorita? Vale. Últimamente se está publicando aquí en España, por parte de la Fundación COTEC, estos datos a nivel provincial y regional, ¿no? Esto podría elevar, digamos, el foco del análisis, descendiendo al comercio interprovincial, por ejemplo, y después también analizando los flujos, digamos, de retorno.
Pues sería de hecho una extensión muy natural del modelo y del paper, ¿no? Porque ahora lo que tenemos es qué pasa relativo a una caja negra, que es el comercio interno. Si conseguimos, digamos, rebajar, digamos, utilizar los flujos nacionales para abrir esa caja negra, nos podría dar resultados también interesantes de qué sucede con los flujos interprovinciales o intercomunidades autónomas cuando se cambia la complejidad o del país o la complejidad de cada una de las regiones. Y sería, de hecho, es lo que está pasando, digamos, a nivel, digamos, del movimiento natural de la literatura del comercio. Se está yendo más a un estudio regionalizado de los flujos, porque antes no disponíamos de esos datos, ahora los disponemos y ya no tenemos que tener una referencia que sea 0 y 1, ¿no? Lo podemos hacer, digamos, una referencia un poco más precisa.
Sería abrir la puerta, digamos, de todos esos dos modelos del comercio internacional al análisis regional.
Exactamente. ¿No? De hecho, en algún otro paper lo que hemos hecho ha sido por ejemplo, para el caso español, es decir, bueno, vamos a suponer que de todos los países del mundo tenemos solo datos internacionales, pero de España disponemos de datos interprovinciales, metemos a España, digamos, como si fuera, digamos, una aglomeración de 17 provincias y podemos ir viendo, digamos, lo que antes decía, pues el efecto de las exportaciones españolas, podemos ir viendo en cada una de las provincias.